Somebody asked me the other day why I am so negative about sanctions, and I'll try and go through it as much as I can. Let's put the thesis plainly. Broad economic sanctions are a noisy substitute for real strategy. They punish the poor, they harden regimes, they enrich fixers, they leave decision makers to sip espresso behind compound walls. When they work, they often do so by accident. When they fail, they do so predictably. And we need a better toolkit. Why the underform? I think there's about six reasons that I can think of. First of all, they misdiagnose power. Autocrats don't govern by consent in the way that we imagine. They price in public pain. So Russia, Iran, North Korea, Myanmar, these systems cushion elites through patronage, monopolies, and security services. The money is transferred from a nurse's grocery basket to the insider's balance sheet. Leaders adjust the exchange rate or reassign subsidies, and they simply carry on. They don't mind about the pain of ordinary people. Sanctions hit ordinary people. So the extraordinary elite are already immune from the effect of sanctions. Secondly, the sanctions leak by design. Trade is a network, not a tap. Shut one valve and flows reroute through America, Kazakhstan, the Gulf, Turkey, Malaysia. The result is transshipment, shell companies, reflagged cargoes, the shadow fleet, the ghost fleet. Goods still move, they just move expensively. And the extra costs land on ordinary consumers inside the target country. They sometimes land on our shoulders as well. Thirdly, they create perverse protection. Exits by Western firms hand assets to local cronies at fire sale prices. What was meant to be punishment becomes import substitution on steroids. Russia's food self-sufficiency after 2014 is a case in point. Sanctions can act like externally imposed protectionism. Fourthly, they fragment enforcement. When the UK alone, within the UK alone, you need the FCDO, the HM Treasury, Business and Trade, Transport to sing from the same hymn sheet. Add OFAC in the state in Washington and 27 EU capitals and countless regulators. Complexity breeds gaps, gaps breed manoeuvres. Fifthly, they corrode humanitarian space. The carve-out on paper is cold comfort to the bank's compliance officer. Over-compliance throttles legitimate aid and medicine. In Myanmar, the junta's revenue streams endure while power cuts and drug shortages expand. In Iran, inflation punishes households far more than it constrains the Revolutionary Guard. Sixth, they trap us rhetorically. Announce sanctions with maximist goals, regime change, instant peace, moral renewal, and you've set a test that you cannot pass. Rolling them back then looks like capitulation. And relaxation feels like a gift. That cannot be the posture towards Russia, Israel, Iran, or North Korea. Once the sanctions are in, you can't take them back. But sanctions should never have been there in the first place. Sanctions are a blunt tool. As I say, works occasionally by accident. Mikhail Khodorkovsky's sobriety metaphor is apt. He says, you do not cure addiction by snatching a glass. Deterrence requires credible force, not merely economic gestures. In Ukraine, the decisive variable is artillery barrels, air defense, industrial capacity, and guarantees that change the Kremlin's calculus. Sanctions alone cannot deliver that. At best, they should be the garnish, not the meal. So who actually pays for sanctions? Ordinary households through higher prices, job losses, currency collapse. SMEs cut off from parts and payments because a correspondent bank gets nervous. Civil society, visas denied, funding frozen, travel blocked. Communication interrupted. One way to solve a dispute is to communicate. Once we start imposing sanctions and trade problems, we cut off communication with the people who could actually affect change. And of course, Western consumers are greatly inconvenienced by sanctions, with dearer energy and supply chain frictions. Who does the people who don't pay in proportion are the decision makers. They own the monopolies that capture the scarcity premium. So if we want effect without hypocrisy or collateral cruelty, we need to shift from bludgeon to scalpel. We need to make hard power credible. We need to surge munitions, air defense, and ISR to Ukraine on multi-year contracts. We need to move from donation cycles to co-production inside Europe. Capacity deters. We need to exercise and posture so that incursions into NATO airspace meet automatic published responses. We need to replace blanket sanctions with network sanctions, slowly, so the removal of one sanction doesn't look like some sort of reward. We need to target logistics choke points. We need marine insurance, classification, bunkering, port services. We need to deny Russia the shadow fleet unless full transparency is provided. We need to deny Russia access to these things unless full transparency is provided. We need to sanction procurement agents, flight forwarders, specific HS coded components with unique identifiers and identifiers, not whole sectors. We need to follow the item rules. If a US or UK origin chip appears in a missile, the distributor has moved. The distributor that moved it loses market access for all products. Thirdly, we need financial forensics, not moral theatre. Beneficial ownership transparency with real penalties for misfiring. Public-private intel cells that fuse customs data, SWIFT metadata, and corporate registries to map evasion rings and take them down. We need civil recovery and unexplained wealth orders that bite, paired with fast-track due process so mistakes are corrected quickly. We need corporate duty of vigilance, a statutory supply chain duty for high-risk goods with auditing obligations and director liability for willful blindness. We need to name and shame dashboards for fixed firms, for listed firms that continue indirect trade through transshipment hubs. We need an energy strategy that removes the lever. We need to accelerate LNG regas, power grid interconnectors, heat pump deployment so imported molecules lose leverage. We need to tie maritime service access to compliance with the oil price cap plus AIS integrity. We need tamper with transponders, then people lose cover. We need conditionality with escrow, not gifts, where sanctions relief is on the table. Structure it needs to be structured as parked. We need reversible tranches linked to verifiable steps. Ceasefire lines need to be held, hostages released, inspectors admitted. Money is unlocked automatically when monitors certify compliance, and it snaps back. The money stops the moment they do not. That avoids permission optics. We need lawfare with teeth. Indictments with war crimes, cyber theft, export control evasion, backed by red notices and visa bans for families as well as principals. Asset freezes that fund victim compensation schemes through interest while principal remains untouched until settlement. And finally, we need to flood target markets with verified data on elite wealth, draft dodger privileges, and the casualty to objective ratio. Sanctions preach, facts persuade. When sanctions are unavoidable, we need to set rules that do less harm. We need to define the objective in one sentence and tie each designation to it. If the objective changes, restate it publicly. Everything has to have a time limit with automatic reviews and explicit off-ramps. Avoid the forever wars in economic form. We need humanitarian protection that works in practice, licensed banks, safe payment corridors, standard templates that compliance teams can trust. We need to measure impact quarterly, prices of key staples, medicine availability, elite asset movements, evasion pathways shut. We need to publish the scorecard. And we need to coordinate fewer, better packages with tight allied alignment rather than sprawling lists that impress headlines and fail to work in practice. Sanctions gratify the urge to do something. They rarely move the people who matter. They can, however, support a strategy that does move them if narrowed to very specific choke points, to very specific aims and areas, focused and fused with intelligence and law and paired with credible force and realistic conditionality. They should be limited and they should be time limited so that when they stop, there is room for these things to stop without them looking like rewards. Otherwise you go on bruising the many while the few retreat to their dacha. If our aim is to deter and to end wars on acceptable terms, then we need to sharpen the scalpel, build the arsenal, close the valves that actually bite, and stop pretending the bludgeon is a brain.